Picture this: a quiet evening where the air feels heavier than it should, like it's pressing down on my chest with secrets I can't quite name. I'm sitting on the edge of my worn-out couch, staring at the flickering light of a candle that's almost burned out, much like certain parts of my life. My name is Elizabeth, and at 33, I've spent the last 13 years building a world that, from the outside, looks picture perfect. But let me pull back the curtain for you. Let you see the cracks in the foundation that I've been trying to ignore for far too long. I married Mark when I was just 20, young and full of dreams that shimmered like mirages in the desert. He was my anchor back then, steady and sure, with a smile that could melt away any doubt. Now, though, that smile feels like a memory I can't quite grasp. We've got 2 kids, Lily, my fierce 10-year-old with a mind sharper than a tack, always asking questions I don't have answers for, and Ethan, my sweet 8-year-old, who still climbs into my lap for stories even though he's getting too big for it. They're my heart, walking around outside my body, but even they can't fill the hollow spaces that have grown between Mark and me. Our home in a quiet suburban neighborhood is the kind of place where everyone waves, but no one really knows what's going on behind closed doors. I've spent years playing the part of the devoted wife and mother, packing lunches, attending school plays, and smiling through small talk at block parties. But lately, every day feels like I'm dragging myself through quicksand. There's a tension in the air, unspoken but thick, like the moment before a storm breaks Mark and I. We don't fight, not with raised voices or slammed doors. It's worse. It's the silence, the way we pass each other like ghosts in our own house, barely touching, barely speaking. There are nights when I lie awake next to him, feeling the distance between us grow wider, wondering when we stopped being a team. I miss the heat we used to have, the kind of connection that made the world disappear. I remember moments, intimate, stolen ones, where our breaths would sync and every touch felt like a promise. Now, those memories are like faded photographs, and even thinking about them feels like a betrayal of the cold reality we're living in. I crave something, anything, to remind me I'm still alive, still capable of feeling that fire. But instead, I'm met with routine, with the monotony of laundry and bills and forced smiles over dinner. I've tried to talk to Mark, to bridge this chasm, but the words stick in my throat. Maybe it's fear of what he might say, or worse, what he might not. Maybe it's the weight of 13 years, the fear of unraveling everything we've built for Lily and Ethan. So, I keep it inside. So, with all that heaviness weighing on me, I decided I needed to get away. Even if just for a few days I packed a small suitcase, kissed Lily and Ethan goodbye, and told Mark I'd be back soon. He just nodded, barely looking up from his phone, and that silence cut deeper than any words could. I needed space to breathe, to think. And the old country house my family owns seemed like the perfect place to escape. It's been sitting empty for months, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, a quiet retreat where I could maybe find a piece of myself again. The drive out there felt like shedding layers of stress with every mile. The roads wound through dense forests, the kind of thick, untamed wilderness that makes you feel small in the best way. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering pines, casting golden streaks across the asphalt, and I rolled down the window to let the crisp air rush over me. It smelled of earth and pine needles, a stark contrast to the stale tension of home. As the miles stretched on, a sense of calm started to settle in my chest, like I was finally outrunning the ghosts that haunt my everyday life. I stopped at a little gas station just off the highway, a rundown place with a single pump and a flickering neon sign. I filled up the tank, and when I went inside to pay, the cashier, an older woman with deep lines etched into her face, gave me this sympathetic smile. It was like she could see right through me, like she knew I was running from something. I didn't say much, just nodded and took my change, but her look stuck with me as I got back in the car. When I finally pulled up to the country house, the gravel crunching under my tires, it was like stepping into a memory. The cabin sat there, weathered but sturdy, surrounded by trees that seemed to guard it from the rest of the world. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and fumbled with the key, the lock sticking a little as it always does. Pushing the door open, I was hit with that familiar musty smell of a place that hasn't been lived in for too long. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped inside, dragging my bag behind me. I dropped it in the small living room, the faded couch and old wooden coffee table, exactly as I'd left them last time. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through the windows, and I crossed the room to push them open, letting in a rush of cool, fresh air. It felt good, like the house was waking up with me. I figured I'd make a cup of tea before unpacking, something to ground me after the long drive, so I headed toward the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. But then, just as I reached for the kettle, I froze. A noise, a muffled sound, like a stifled laugh, or maybe a footstep, came from the back of the house. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I stood there, breath caught in my throat, straining to hear if the sound would come again. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just the old house settling, or a critter sneaking through the walls. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, a low murmur of voices. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone. Gripping the edge of the counter, I crept toward the hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I saw them, 3 young men, barely out of their teens, huddled near the back door. They looked rough around the edges, with worn-out clothes and tired eyes, like they'd been on the road for too long. I must have gasped because their heads snapped up, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, frozen in a silent standoff. I demanded to know who they were and what they were doing in my house. The tallest one, who introduced himself as Jake, stepped forward with his hands raised, voice shaky as he explained they'd been hiking nearby, got lost, and stumbled upon the cabin thinking it was abandoned. The shorter one, Ryan, chimed in, saying they didn't mean any harm, they just needed a place to crash for the night. The third, Caleb, stayed quiet, his gaze darting between me and the floor, like he was waiting for me to call the cops. I should have. Every sensible part of me screamed to send them packing, to lock the door behind them and wait out the night with my phone in hand. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the raw desperation in their voices, or the way Jake's eyes softened when he mentioned they had nowhere else to go. I thought of Lily and Ethan, picturing them lost and scared, hoping someone would show them kindness. My heart clenched at the idea of turning these kids away into the cold, dark woods. I wrestled with myself for what felt like an eternity, standing there in the dim hallway, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Finally, I sighed, rubbing my temples, and told them they could stay, but just for one night. They had to be gone by sunrise. I laid out the rules sharp and clear. Don't touch anything, don't wander around, and they'd sleep on the living room floor with whatever blankets I could scrounge up. Their faces lit up with relief, and Jake thanked me over and over, even offering to help with any chores, as a way to repay me. Ryan, quieter, asked if there was any food to spare, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was ashamed to even ask. Caleb just gave me a small grateful nod, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since I'd seen him. I pointed them to the living room, telling them to settle in while I figured out what to do next. The long drive was catching up with me by then. My muscles ached from hours behind the wheel, and I could feel the grime of the day clinging to my skin. I needed a moment to myself, to wash away the tension and clear my head. I told the guys I was going to freshen up, pointing them towards some canned soup in the pantry for dinner. They nodded, already rummaging through the shelves as I grabbed a towel and my small bag of toiletries. I headed down the narrow hall to the bathroom, the floorboards groaning under my steps. The space was tiny, barely big enough to turn around in, with chipped blue tiles lining the walls and a rusty faucet that always took a few twists to get working. A small window sat high above the sink, letting in a faint sliver of fading daylight that cast long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary for the moment. As I started to undress, peeling off my travel-worn clothes, my mind churned with the strangeness of the day. I'd come here for solitude, to escape the emptiness gnawing at me back home, and now I had 3 strangers under my roof. Part of me was still on edge, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake letting them stay. But another part, a quieter one, was curious, maybe even relieved to have some kind of distraction from my own thoughts. The morning after feels like waking up in a fog, the kind that clings to your skin and muddles your thoughts. I'm in my bedroom at the cabin, alone, the thin sheets tangled around my legs as I blink against the pale light sneaking through the curtains. Last night plays in my mind like a fever dream, fragmented and surreal, but the weight of it is real, crushing. I can't shake the memory of what happened, the choices I made in the heat of the moment, and as I lie there, staring at the cracked ceiling, guilt slams into me like a tidal wave. Mark's face flashes before me, steady and trusting, followed by Lily's curious eyes and Ethan's innocent grin. My chest tightens, a vice of shame squeezing until it's hard to breathe. I roll out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor, and shuffle toward the dresser. I avoid the mirror hanging on the wall. I can't face myself right now, can't look into my own eyes knowing what I've done. My hands tremble as I fumble with the buttons of my shirt, each tiny movement a struggle, like my body is fighting against me. There's a lump in my throat, stubborn and unyielding, no matter how many times I swallow. It's as if my guilt has taken physical form, lodged there to remind me of every misstep. I force myself to move, to leave the room, and head toward the living room, where I know Jake, Ryan, and Caleb are waiting. The air feels different as I step into the space, charged with an unspoken tension that hangs between us like a thick fog. They're already awake, scattered across the room. Jake sprawled on the couch, Ryan sitting cross-legged on the floor with his head bowed, and Caleb leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Their eyes flicker to me briefly before darting away, and I can tell they feel it too, this heavy silence that says more than words ever could. No one mentions last night. It's as if we've all agreed to pretend it didn't happen, to bury it under layers of forced normalcy. Jake clears his throat and offers to make coffee, his voice a little too bright, like he's trying to fill the void with something mundane. I nod, muttering a quiet thanks, while Ryan keeps his gaze fixed on the floor, tracing invisible patterns with his finger. Caleb, ever the one to push through discomfort, asks about the lake nearby, his tone casual, as if we're just old friends catching up. I answer with a vague comment about it being a nice spot for a walk, but my heart isn't in it. Despite everything, I find myself telling them they can stay a bit longer. I justify it in my mind. They still need help, a place to regroup before heading out into the world again. But deep down, I know the truth. I'm not ready to be alone with my thoughts, to face the silence of this cabin without their presence as a buffer. The next few days blur into a strange sort of routine, a fragile balance of keeping busy and avoiding the elephant in the room. They pitch in with chores, and I let them. Jake tackles a leaky pipe in the kitchen, with a surprising knack for fixing things. Ryan chops wood for the fireplace with a quiet determination, and Caleb hauls the logs inside, his strength evident in every movement. I cook meals, simple things like stew and grilled sandwiches, and we eat together at the small dining table, though I keep my emotional distance, or at least I try to. But there are moments, late at night by the flickering fire, where the walls I've built start to crumble. Jake opens up about his dream of becoming a musician, his voice soft and wistful as he describes the songs he's written in his head, waiting for a chance to play them. Ryan, usually so reserved, shares the pressure he feels from family expectations, the weight of being someone he's not just to make them proud. Caleb, the most guarded of the three, admits he's running from a past he can't face, though he doesn't elaborate, and the shadows in his eyes tell me not to ask. I listen, drawn in by their stories, by the rawness of their youth. The drive home feels like a slow descent into a storm I can't escape. My hands grip the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turn white, the familiar road stretching out before me now seeming like paths to a foreign land. Every mile brings me closer to the life I've built, the life I've risked, and my mind is a chaotic mess of excuses and half-formed justifications. Nothing feels right, nothing feels true. I rehearse lies in my head, trying to find the perfect way to explain where I've been, what I've done. But each word tastes bitter, like ash on my tongue. For a fleeting moment, I imagine spilling everything to Mark, laying bare the weight I've been carrying since that night at the cabin. I picture his face, the shock, the hurt, and my stomach twists so violently I nearly swerve off the road. No, I can't do that. I can't risk losing everything. My family, my home, the fragile shell of normalcy I've clung to for so long. The thought of his disappointment, of seeing the trust in his eyes shatter, is more than I can bear. So I bury it deeper, shoving the truth into a dark corner of my mind, where I hope it'll stay hidden. I pull into a rest area about halfway home, my hands trembling as I turn off the engine. The parking lot is nearly empty, just a few trucks idling in the distance. Their headlights cutting through the dusk, I step out into the cool evening air, the gravel crunching under my boots, and make my way to the restroom. The fluorescent lights inside are harsh, buzzing faintly as I stand over the sink, splashing cold water on my face. It shocks my skin, sharp and biting, but it does little to clear the fog in my head. I grip the edges of the sink, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes look hollow, haunted, like they belong to someone else. I force a smile, practicing the curve of my lips, the casual tilt of my head, but it looks wrong, too tight, too fake. I try again, murmuring to myself, "It was fine, just a relaxing trip," testing the lie out loud. My voice sounds thin, unconvincing even to my own ears. I splash more water on my face, letting the droplets run down my cheeks, hoping it'll wash away the guilt that clings to me like a second skin. But it doesn't. It never will. I dry off with a rough paper towel, take a deep breath, and head back to the car, steeling myself for what's waiting at home. When I finally pull into the driveway, the sight of our house hits me like a punch to the chest. The living room lights are on, casting a warm glow through the curtains, and I can hear the faint sound of Lily and Ethan's laughter spilling out into the night. It's a sound that should comfort me, should wrap around me like a blanket, but instead, it pierces straight through to the ache in my heart. Love and guilt twist together inside me, a tangled knot I can't unravel. I sit there for a moment, the engine idling, my hands still on the wheel as I try to gather the pieces of myself I have to be Elizabeth, the mother, the wife, not the woman who made choices she can't take back. I cut the engine, grab my suitcase from the back seat, and step out into the cool night air. Each step toward the front door feels heavier, like I'm dragging chains behind me, but I force myself to keep moving. I turn the knob, the familiar creak of the door echoing in my ears, and step inside. The warmth of the house envelops me immediately, the smell of dinner lingering in the air, something savory, maybe the stew Mark likes to make on chilly nights. Lily and Ethan spot me before I can even set my bag down, their faces lighting up as they barrel toward me with shouts of, "Mommy!" Their small bodies crash into mine, arms wrapping around my waist, and I drop to my knees, pulling them close. I hold them a little too tightly, my fingers digging into their backs as I bury my face in their hair, kissing. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story.